eligible to be reunited.
With more on today's reunification deadline and other news of the day, Democrat Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon is joining us now from Capitol Hill. He's a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, welcome.
Oh, thank you so much. Good to be with you.
Good to be with you. Senator, the Trump administration is working to reunite hundreds of separated families by today's deadline. What do you know about the progress they are making?
Well, at the end of the day, they may have perhaps 1,500 children reunited. This is a little over half of the children that they separated. And it's so difficult for these connections to be made because the administration did not track the connections between the children and the parents. They were in a very dark place when they decided to send a political message by inflicting trauma on children. And then they were incompetent or callous in not tracking the connection between the family members. And so I'm glad they're making progress, but we should never have been in this place to begin with.
And you tried to gain access to a child detention center in Texas last month. You were turned away. Describe that experience. And since then, have you been able to speak to any of the parents and the children who've been separated?
Yes, I went back 2 weeks later after I was turned away on Father's Day with 5 fellow members of Congress, and we did get a waiver to get in. What we found with this warehouse, this former Walmart, had 300 bedrooms, and earlier in the year they had 300 kids, but they had gone up to a total of almost 1,500 young boys stuffed into that Walmart. I asked, well, 2 months ago, how many did you have? They said 500, and now they had 1,000. I said, in this rapid expansion, what are you missing? They said, well, we don't have mental health counselors. And just that itself, which really hasn't been reported on much, is a situation where there obviously was no planning. And to not have mental health counselors when you have children who have gone through trauma abroad, they've been traumatized en route, they've been traumatized by taking away from their parents, and there was no planning for counseling services, and then the kids just stuffed in there, overloading the facility. It really was extraordinarily disturbing to see the United States involved in this type of child snatching strategy.
Senator, as you know, the Secretary of State testified in front of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, which you are on, and he was asked about that private meeting between the president and Putin and whether or not he was confident that he understood what went on in that meeting. He said he was. Were you satisfied with the Secretary of State's answers?
Oh, absolutely not satisfied. He only knows what Trump told him. And so if Trump could have had all kinds of conversations that he wasn't sharing. The secretary did a very good job of defending the president. But the reality is that this president has been so weak on Russia. He didn't want to implement the sanctions in a fierce way related to the Ukraine occupation and the annexation of Crimea. He didn't respond fiercely to the assassinations Russia conducted in Britain. He hasn't responded strongly to the issue of Russia working closely with the Syrian government to barrel bomb and gas its own citizens. And he certainly has denied time and time again, as recently as 2 days ago, that Russia was involved in the U.S. elections. And this wasn't just a touch on the U.S. elections. This was a major cyber warfare act against the United States of America.
So the president wants to have a second meeting with Vladimir Putin. Should he be able to have another private meeting like that?
Absolutely a terrible idea. The president and his team are under investigation for potential collaboration with the Russians. To have the president meeting privately is a bad idea. I'm glad that they announced yesterday they're not going to do so while he's still under investigation. And so that was the right decision to make.
And you have a bill pending, or you're planning on introducing a bill to ensure that?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Actually, I did introduce a bill to say exactly that the president cannot meet alone while he's under investigation with the head of Russia.
Senator, I want to ask you about something that you told BuzzFeed News. You told them that President Trump's meeting with Vladimir Putin, in and around that discussion that the president had with the Russian president, that Putin may have something close to the salacious allegations that were made in the infamous Steele dossier. What have you seen that's led you to believe that?
Well, let me frame it this way, that if a president of the United States was in a situation where Russia had leverage over him, you would see the type of arguments that this president has made. Whether it's financial, whether it's salacious, we'll all find out in due course. But to have the president for a year and a half proceed to defend Russia and say that they were not involved in a cyber attack on our elections, when every intelligence agency, when the Democratic leaders and the Republican leaders of the Senate and the House are so clear about this, you have to ask, why is the president unable to admit and lead a fierce response to this attack, this assault, this act of warfare against the United States of America?
So you made those comments to BuzzFeed before the meeting that the president had with President Putin. After the meeting, where the president criticized his own intelligence services and said the United States was blamed for the deterioration of U.S.-Russia relationships. What did you think after that summit?
Yeah, I got to tell you, the president said it was the foolishness of America that had led to the deterioration of the relationship between Russia and the United States. And I asked Pompeo yesterday, what foolishness of America? Why isn't the president blaming their activity supporting Syrian government, or assassinating people in Britain, or annexing Crimea, or occupying East Ukraine, or assaulting the U.S. election? And we didn't get a good answer on that from Secretary Pompeo.
Another topic for you. The Democrats have voiced their disappointment in the president's Supreme Court nominee, Brett Kavanaugh. Doesn't seem like the Democrats have much wiggle room, though, in terms of keeping him off the Supreme Court. What's the strategy moving forward? What's the plan to oppose him?
Well, a confirmation shouldn't be about Democrats versus Republicans. It should be about, is this individual a fit character to serve on the Supreme Court? And that was the standard that Hamilton set out when the Constitution was written. And the situation here is that this particular nominee has a vision for executive power that is not anticipated in any structure, any interpretation of our Constitution. He believes that a president should be more like a king, that even under our Constitution, he or she should never be indicted and not even investigated. In fact, this nominee has gone on to say that if the president deems something unconstitutional, it's unconstitutional even if the court has said it's constitutional. That is just an absolutely absurd vision of presidential power, fit for a king and a kingdom, but not for a constitutional democratic republic.
It'll be interesting to see if you can suggest that very same point to some of your Republican colleagues in the Senate, Senator. But let me talk about the future for a moment, if I may. You've made 3 trips to New Hampshire this year, including one earlier this month, which, of course, has sparked some speculation. So, are you considering a run for the presidency of the United States in 2020?
Well, I'm completely focused on the elections for 2018 in November. We need to have a Democratic majority come out of those elections that can stop the horrific nominees to the court and the horrific nominees to the executive branch, so that there is no more Betsy DeVos, who hates public education, in charge of public education. And there's no Scott Pruitt, who hates clean air and clean water, in charge of clean air and clean water. But certainly I did make those trips. I'm kind of exploring the possibility, but my main focus is on the U.S. Senate in November.
So you are considering the possibility of running for the presidency in 2020?
I'm checking into the possibility.
All right. If not you, though that's really interesting information, if not you, any other contenders that you would maybe throw your support behind?
There's just a marvelous set of leaders in the Democratic Party who would all be phenomenal presidents.
All right, Senator, we'll be watching you to see what you do in the